I know that some people were a little disappointed with the previous episode since it turned out to be a complete waste of time that lasted over 50 minutes, but you'll be happy to know that this one has some noteworthy changes in it. Bo-Katan gets a new piece of clothing, Goku also gets a new piece of clothing, and Blueberry learns to forgive. In other words, it's still a complete waste of time, but hey, it only lasted 30 minutes this time, which I have to say is a fairly significant improvement. The Mandalorian is bad. Episode 4. In Star Wars, the Mandalorians are supposed to be some of the most feared and skilled warriors in all of the galaxy, but this series has turned them into pathetic buffoons, and I honestly don't understand why. Normally, when characters are degraded in this way, it's for two reasons. First is nauseating woke stupidity that seeks to destroy popular male characters in order to uplift unpopular female characters. And secondly, it's to make way for something that's bigger, better, new, and improved, like what happened with Luke Skywalker and Rey Palpatine. However, that doesn't seem to be the case here, because sure, Boba Fett was turned into a walking joke in his own series, but with these other Mandalorians, it seems that half of them are female, including the de facto leader of the Armorer. And yet, time after time, we see that these Mandalorians who are being led by a woman are completely and utterly incompetent in almost every single way. And it seems to defy the narrative. I don't understand why they are being destroyed like this. The only reason I can come up with is that it's nothing more than good old-fashioned dog shit writing. The people making this series simply have no idea what they're doing, and they're failing so hard that some of the coolest and most powerful warriors in all of Star Wars have now become the equivalent of a jobber in professional wrestling. They're just there to lose.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
This episode opens up with something that at first glance appears to be decent. There are a lot of Mandalorians on the beach practicing various forms of combat, and for the most part, it looks solid. So far, so good. That is, until I see some of the Mandalorians who are practicing with their blasters. They're aiming at the water. I want to point out that they're not aiming at targets on the water, they are simply aiming at the water.
Why?
I'm not exactly sure why the Mandalorians are trying to reenact Caligula's war against Poseidon, but I don't think it's a very good idea.
I understood that reference.
First of all, this blaster fire would probably attract some of the giant sea creatures like the alligator thing we saw in a previous episode. Once more, I also want to point out that the other one died right here on the beach, and yet it's nowhere to be found. There's no trace of it. It just magically disappeared because the writers can't be bothered. Since they had such a hard time dealing with the first one, why do they now seem to be deliberately trying to attract another one? And yes, as we'll see later in the episode, there are more of those giant alligator things. And secondly, what training benefit could this exercise possibly achieve? These Mandalorians aren't attacking anything specific. There is no method for them to determine if they are actually hitting the spot that they are aiming at. Now, I've spent quite a few years in the Army, and not once did any of my training ever include firing indiscriminately into the water. I don't think it's a really effective way to train your blaster fire.
I started blasting. Bah! Bah!
But then again, what do I know? I'm just a former soldier who happens to be an expert on multiple weapon systems, and clearly these Hollywood writers who have never touched a weapon in their life know more about this subject than I do.
Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
But don't worry, it gets worse. Mando decides that it's time for Goku to start training as a Mandalorian, so he presents Goku to one of the other foundlings and issues a training challenge. This foundling happens to be the one that we saw in the first episode who was getting his helmet. He asks why Goku doesn't have his helmet, and Mando says that he's too young and he can't speak and therefore he can't say the creed to accept his helmet. And this makes perfect sense to everyone, apparently, except for the foundling who says that, well, if Goku can't wear a helmet, then he's too young to train.
Is this true?
This, of course, is total bullshit, because foundlings absolutely do begin their training before they get a helmet. This idiot right here only got his helmet in the first episode, which was only a few days ago in the story's timeline. Are we supposed to believe that until that moment, he had never done any kind of training whatsoever? We're supposed to believe that this guy, who is the son of one of the other Mandalorians, specifically Blueberry, never received any other training at all ever until just a couple days ago when he got his helmet? Are you fucking serious?
What the hell are you talking about?
However, instead of pointing this out, Mando replies with what is supposed to be impressive wisdom, and he says, "One does not speak unless one knows."
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Regardless, Mando then says it's up to the challenged foundling to determine what kind of contest they're going to compete in, and that foundling chooses training darts. Honestly, I think it would have been more hilarious if he had picked hand-to-hand combat, and then he just punted that little green bastard across the beach. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Instead, the Foundling and Goku begin their match. The Foundling wins the first 2 rounds until Goku gets a pep talk from Mando. On the 3rd round, Goku does some stupid backflips that really don't make any sense, and then he hits the Foundling with all 3 of the darts at once. And I have to ask, why did he handle it this way? If you're going to jump over and behind your opponent, shouldn't you try to hit them from behind? Doesn't jumping over them and behind them and then immediately jumping back in front of them not make any tactical sense? I mean, like, what are you doing? You go all of that way in order to make yourself out of the line of sight of your opponent, only to then immediately put yourself back into the opponent's line of sight before you attack? Why?
Not a great plan.
Also, I'm fairly certain that it would be against the rules to fire more than 1 dart in a single round, judging by what the other Foundling did in the previous rounds, but the writers don't seem to care, and Goku is declared the winner. The Foundling, who seems to be a little upset, walks away from the contest when suddenly a giant CGI bird swoops in and grabs him.
Check it out, I'm a baby bird. Buddy!
As the bird is flying away, Mando reacts quickly and is about to start firing his blaster, but Blueberry stops him. He says that the bird will kill the Foundling if they try to attack it with blasters. He knows this because it's not the first time that this has happened. Over the next several minutes, we'll learn that this situation has occurred several times and that they've never been able to rescue the person who is taken. This is the giant alligator situation all over again. If you know that there is a concern like a giant alligator or a giant bird that is going to be a regular and constant threat, then why do you not have any sort of security in place? Why is there not any kind of technology used for detection of these gigantic creatures? Why is it that the Mandalorians, who are supposed to be some of the best warriors in the galaxy, are constantly being caught with their pants down? Obviously, the writers want to set up this absurd rescue situation, but there are better ways to handle it because as it's being presented, it makes the Mandalorians look like incompetent buffoons. For now, the plan is to chase after the bird using their jetpacks and trying to find the nest so that they can mount a rescue later on. Remember this because it's going to come up later. The Mandalorians do use their jetpacks, but eventually they run out of fuel before finding the nest. Blueberry says that this happens every time. They always run out of fuel before they can find the nest. And I realize that these Mandalorians may not be in the fully correct state of mind at this point, trying to desperately rescue the Foundling, but I have to point out that if this strategy has failed every single time beforehand, why would they believe that it would suddenly start working now? Why, if they never had enough fuel to get to the nest, do they think that it would somehow have changed?
Right down the road. Can't miss it.
However, in this situation, Bo-Katan, being marginally smarter than the other Mandalorians, quickly jumped into her ship and chased after the bird. She was able to track it all the way back to its nest, but rather than attempting a rescue by herself or just blasting the stupid thing after it dropped the Foundling, she decides to return to the Mandalorian base where she gathers up a team that includes Mando and Blueberry. That rescue situation is going to get extraordinarily stupid and contrived, but we'll have to come back to that. For now, the armorer has decided to make a piece of armor for Goku. While she's working, he has a flashback to when he escaped the Jedi Temple during Order 66. We see Jedi dying all around him, but eventually we're met with this guy.
Who the hell are you?
Hey Mom, can we stop and pick up some Mace Windu? No, honey, we already have Mace Windu at home.
Damn, you been had.
He may not have the same star power as Samuel L. Jackson, but discount Mace Windu works just as well and at a great value. And while you might think I'm making a somewhat unfair joke, it actually hits quite a bit closer to home than you would expect. After all, Mace Windu while not being particularly strong with force powers, he was one of the best fighters with a lightsaber. And here we have discount great value Mace Windu doing something very similar by using 2 lightsabers. They're not even trying to hide it. This actually is a discount version of Mace Windu.
Now there are 2 of them.
Regardless, they escape in a small speeder bike and eventually make it to another platform with a ship capable of hyperspace. Then discount great value Mace Windu and Goku escape the planet, and then the flashback ends. The actual length of this episode is about 26 minutes, and this flashback eats up about 5 minutes of the runtime while not adding anything of value. We already knew that Goku was at the temple during Order 66. We know that the Jedi helped him to escape. We may not have known the specific Jedi that helped him get off planet, but that didn't really matter a whole lot, and it certainly did not warrant a 5-minute flashback. The scene moves back to the present where the armorer has finished her work, and it turns out to be a Mandalorian seal with the same logo that Mando has. Essentially, it's just a disc made out of Beskar that he's going to wear on his chest. Though I have to question the armorer's choice here, because she already made a shirt of Beskar chainmail, so it's not like Goku really needs anything more to protect his chest. I know he's not supposed to have a helmet yet, but maybe he could have leggings or gauntlets or boots or a pauldron. It seems kind of pointless to double up the Beskar on a spot that's already being protected. Continuing with the other group that's been tracking the bird, they've arrived nearby the nest, but they have to stop a small distance away, because again, they're afraid that the bird would kill the foundling if it noticed them. But I hate to be the one to point this out, but large predators usually don't keep prey alive for this long, and realistically, the foundling should probably be dead by now.
Hey, is any of this sinking in? You're dead. Dead.
But don't worry, it gets worse. They make it to the nest, which is on top of a gigantic stone spire, and you might think that urgency would be important here, but instead, Bo-Katan comes up with the brilliant plan of having a campsite at the base, and then they plan to stay there all night and then climb up first thing in the morning.
Why would they do this?
These clowns do realize that if the foundling is not dead by now, that waiting until the morning is not going to increase his chances of survival. But for whatever reason, the idiots decide to have a campsite and then they sing Kumbaya all night. Meanwhile, the foundling is up on top of the spire being torn apart.
I don't like having to wash the blood of innocents off my hands. Don't make me do it again.
The morning finally arrives, and we're told that the Mandalorians can't use their jetpacks to climb the rock spire because it would alert the bird thing and it would kill the foundling. However, this doesn't make any sense and it contradicts what we've already seen in the episode. We learned earlier that if you attack the bird with blasters, then it would kill the prey. Okay, that's fine. But at the same time, we saw a group of Mandalorians that chased the giant bird with their jetpacks. And we also know that this sort of thing happened several times in the past. The bird thing never killed the prey when it was being chased by the Mandalorians using jetpacks. So for what possible reason would they now operate under the assumption that it would suddenly kill the foundling if it heard the jetpacks? It never has before, so why would it now?
Excellent point.
The answer is quite simple. If the Mandalorians had used their jetpacks, they could have flown to the top in a few seconds. But by forcing them to climb up the rock face with their grappling hooks, it adds an extra 5 minutes to the episode length. That's why they can't use their jetpacks. It's as simple as that. The writers are stretching out the length of the episode. The group makes it to the top and sees the nest along with some discarded remains of previously taken Mandalorians. However, the large bird is nowhere to be found. They use a thermal to scan the nest, and they see a heat signature off on the other side. It turns out that Blueberry is the father of the foundling, and he rushes in searching, looking for the foundling, but instead is attacked by giant baby birds that they mistook for the foundling.
Check it out, I'm a baby bird.
But don't worry, it gets worse. The large CGI bird finally arrives, and just like what a normal bird would do, how it would regurgitate some of the food to feed the babies, this large CGI bird does the same thing, except instead of what you would expect with just pieces of the foundling, somehow, miraculously, the CGI bird vomits up the entire foundling, who is very much alive and completely unharmed.
Just a flesh wound.
There are so many things wrong with this, I don't even know where to begin. It appears the writers do not understand why birds do this sort of thing. Baby birds are not able to fully digest things on their own, so the mother bird will eat something and partially digest it, then regurgitates the food so that the babies are able to consume it. That is the entire point of the mama bird swallowing and then regurgitating the food. Yet for some reason, this foundling is completely intact and unharmed, despite the fact that it was likely swallowed shortly after the initial capture, which means that it has been inside of this bird's stomach for somewhere around 15 to 20 hours. We know that Mandalorian helmets can be pressurized and provide air supply, though it's unlikely it would have had enough to last the whole duration, but we'll give them a pass on that one. However, it still doesn't explain why the foundling would have been unharmed by the digestive process happening within the bird's stomach. If only there was another character wearing Mandalorian armor who was in a similar situation being digested by a very large creature. Then we could compare the injuries from that other character to the foundling and see what, if anything, has changed. And what do you know, lucky for us, this exact sort of thing has already happened, so we can examine the result. Boba Fett was trapped inside of a sarlacc, which has a notoriously slow and weak digestive system. It takes much longer for the food to be broken down inside of a sarlacc than it would any other animal or creature. And yet Boba Fett still suffered serious injury after only a few hours. The foundling has been dealing with the bird's digestive system for 3 to 5 times longer and should have suffered severe burns and injury, and yet is completely unharmed.
That don't make no sense.
Not only is this absurd, but it gets more ridiculous when you notice that the bird has very large, sharp teeth, and it would have been even more difficult for it to swallow the foundling whole than to simply chew it up and swallow the pieces. But let's say for the sake of argument that the intent of the bird was to vomit up whatever prey in a fully intact state. Then for what possible reason would this bird go through the arduous process of devouring the prey and then regurgitating it back up if it provided no benefit? Would it not make more sense to simply drop the prey into the nest? Why swallow the prey whole if you're not going to get any benefit from the digestive process, if you're just going to have it in its fully intact state and delivered to the baby birds? It doesn't make any sense. You're completely skipping the point of the whole swallow regurgitation thing. This is yet another great example of these writers wanting certain things to happen because they think it looks cool or because it's funny, and they completely disregard any logical sense for why it would have been happening in the first place and what possible consequences would have been a result of it. Blueberry attempts to rescue the foundling, and he seems to believe that the best way to do this is to jump into the giant bird's mouth.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
I think it's safe to say that Mandalorian strategies and tactics have gone a little bit downhill these days. But now the bird has Blueberry in its mouth, and it's holding the foundling by one of its talons. Then it begins to fly off, and Blueberry tries to use his flamethrower, but he just kind of flails it around and it doesn't really do anything. For the next several minutes, the bird is going to fly around with Blueberry in its mouth, but for some reason, at no point does it ever decide that maybe it would be a good idea to bite down on the thing inside of its mouth that's squirming around and trying to hurt it. As previously noted, this bird thing has very large, sharp teeth, and while it wouldn't be able to penetrate the Beskar armor that Blueberry is wearing, that armor is not covering his entire body, so the bird could easily just bite off his legs. Additionally, the Beskar plates that he wears on his chest and back are only held together with straps. It's not like his torso is protected by one piece of armor that is a shell of Beskar. If the bird decided to bite down even on his torso, then Blueberry would be crushed in between those plates of Beskar. If the bird thing decided to bite down even once, there is no possible way that Blueberry would have survived that. But now we come to the part of the episode where Bo-Katan needs to get herself a new piece of clothing, and a piece of her armor just happens to fall off into the water and is lost. and it turns out to be one of her pauldrons with the Mandalorian symbols, which I might point out seems to be extremely convenient for the story going forward.
Very convenient.
Meanwhile, the other Mandalorians are still chasing after the giant bird using their jetpacks. And you remember how 5 minutes ago we were told that they couldn't use the jetpacks because if the bird heard it, then it would kill the foundling? Well, apparently that doesn't matter anymore. So at the beginning of the episode, it was okay for them to use jetpacks to chase the bird, but then it was not okay for them to use the jetpacks to climb the rock spire because if the bird heard it, then it would kill the foundling. But now that doesn't matter anymore, and it's totally okay to use jetpacks to chase the bird. So, is it direction? Like, if you use the jetpacks in a horizontal direction, then the bird doesn't care? But if you try to use the jetpacks vertically, is that when the bird cares? I don't understand these rules.
What do you want from me?
The Mandalorians are able to use their grappling hooks to tie up the giant bird while it's flying, and it drops Blueberry and the foundling, who are quickly captured by other Mandalorians using jetpacks. With the bird no longer able to fly, it begins falling towards the water, where the giant alligator thing jumps out and devours it. And if this looks familiar, that's because it's the exact same thing that happened in one of the Jurassic Park movies.
Hey, I've seen this one.
With his son now safe, Blueberry has a newfound respect for Mando and Bo-Katan, so we can probably expect him to be extremely loyal from now on. In the previous episode, the writers generated a large sense of animosity between Blueberry and Mando because Mando had broken the creed, but after Mando redeemed himself with the sacred water, all of the other Mandalorians accepted him back, with the exception of Blueberry, who apparently was still mad for some reason. And in order to resolve this issue, the writers concocted this bizarre, nearly incomprehensible rescue scheme that would now allow Blueberry to be put into Mando's debt, and thus get rid of whatever animosity they might have had before.
You owe me one.
The Mandalorians return to the camp, and with them they bring the 3 giant baby birds, which are now going to be trained and raised by the Mandalorians.
You see the new sky horse? I want one.
Because Bo-Katan was so critical in the rescue, the clan rewards her with a new Beskar replacement pauldron that she had lost during the fight. She asks the armorer if it would be okay to use a different symbol than what she was previously using, namely she wants to use the mythosaur. This is the giant sea creature that she saw while in the sacred waters. The armorer says that the mythosaur is always acceptable because it belongs to all Mandalorians. Bo-Katan then tries to tell the armorer that she actually saw the sea creature, and the armorer believes that it was just a vision. But Bo-Katan insists that it was actually a real creature that she witnessed in the sacred water. It was a real thing physically there. But the armorer seems to be completely oblivious to the significance of this. Either she just doesn't believe it, or she's incredibly fucking stupid, because her only response to this earth-shattering information is the standard Mandalorian, "This is the way."
I said, shut up.
That response, "This is the way," does actually have a pretty decent meaning as it reinforces the belief of the creed that these Mandalorians have, but in this situation, it doesn't make any sense. My guess is that the writers simply didn't know how to handle this scenario, and they didn't want the armorer to really confirm it or to go along with it or anything, so they simply had her recite the "this is the way" dialogue in order to make everything appear to be more ambiguous, but that's not what it looks like. It just looks and sounds dumb because she's responding with something that would not be proper to respond to the information that she just got. That's like Bo-Katan flying over the water outside of their camp and noticing one of the giant alligator things. Then she goes back to the cave and tells the armorer, "Hey, there's a giant alligator about a mile offshore in that direction," and then the armorer just says, "This is the way." That doesn't make any fucking sense. That's not the proper use of that phrase. This was one of the more frustrating episodes because not only was it ridiculously contrived, it further destroyed any credibility of the Mandalorians, which, once more, I have to say, I don't know why the writers are trying to make them look like clowns. Perhaps the writers are just dumb, and they don't even realize what they're doing. But thankfully, that's the end of episode 4.
I'm taking shots at the enemy. I'm gonna make it to the top, leave a legacy. If I got something to say, you better let me speak. Turn it up a new degree, bitch, you ain't seen anything. I pop off with the new rock, electronic, blow the sonic roof up. I'm too honest when I take a few shots. They're too toxic, need to take the noose off.